The year 2000 was shaping up to be a banner year for the Ford Motor Company. Then, boom, all hell broke loose. Word went out that the Explorer was linked to serious accidents, now totaling 101 deaths and more than 400 injuries.
Some SUVs didn't just earn bad reviews, they earned terrifying reputations. Behind the glossy marketing and rugged promises, these vehicles were quietly building a history of fatal rollovers, exploding fuel tanks, catastrophic structural failures, and crash test results so bad that experts labeled them outright death traps. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 15 SUVs that shocked investigators, safety agencies, and even longtime owners. And if you think the worst offenders were rare or forgotten models, think again. Some of them were once bestsellers. Let's get into it. Number 15. Ford Explorer. Early 2000s. The Ford Explorer is one of the most recognizable SUVs in American history, but during the early 2000s, it became the center of one of the biggest automotive safety scandals the country had ever seen. What made it so dangerous wasn't just a single design flaw, it was a deadly combination of instability, high rollover risk, and tire failures that turned routine drives into life-threatening situations. Experts traced many of the Explorer's rollover incidents to its high center of gravity and narrow track width. Under normal conditions, the SUV handled decently, but when drivers were forced to swerve, avoid obstacles, or react quickly, the Explorer showed alarming instability. Add to that the infamous Firestone tire blowouts, tires that were factory-equipped on millions of Explorers, and the risk skyrocketed. A tire failure at highway speeds often caused the Explorer to tip, flip, or roll multiple times before coming to a stop. Investigators went deeper and discovered that recommended tire pressures were set unusually low. This softened the ride, making the SUV feel smoother, but it also caused the tires to heat up faster, weakening them and making blowouts more likely. When those blowouts happened, the Explorer's top-heavy design gave drivers almost no chance to regain control. Dozens of fatal accidents triggered a national outcry, intense media coverage, and a massive recall that affected millions of owners. Even after recalls and replacements, the reputation damage was irreversible. Safety analysts repeatedly mentioned the Explorer in discussions of rollover-prone SUVs, and crash test studies continued to highlight structural weaknesses and stability issues. The Explorer eventually improved in later generations, but the early 2000s models are still remembered as one of the most infamous SUVs ever labeled a death trap. Number 14. Chevrolet Blazer, 1990s. The Chevrolet Blazer was one of the most popular midsize SUVs of the 1990s. But behind its tough looks and strong sales was a troubling safety record that experts warned about for years. What made the Blazer particularly dangerous was its tendency to roll over during emergency maneuvers. This wasn't just an occasional incident. Multiple independent tests, including those conducted by Consumer Reports, found that the Blazer performed poorly when pushed even slightly beyond normal driving conditions. The design issues were clear. A high center of gravity combined with a relatively narrow wheelbase made the Blazer unstable during sharp turns or sudden lane changes. Even small shifts in weight, like swerving to avoid an object or correcting after drifting out of a lane, could cause the SUV to tilt dangerously. In many documented cases, drivers who attempted routine avoidance maneuvers lost control almost immediately. Crash test results for the Blazer didn't help its reputation. Government and private testing agencies repeatedly gave it below-average ratings, noting everything from poor structural rigidity to weak roof strength. In rollover events, the roof often crumpled more than expected, increasing the risk of serious injury or death to passengers. Lawsuits and safety petitions piled up, pointing to a pattern of accidents that experts believed could have been prevented with better engineering. The situation became so concerning that Consumer Reports issued rare and harsh warnings about the Blazer, advising buyers to avoid certain model years entirely. This kind of public advisory was almost unheard of for such a mainstream SUV, but the evidence was overwhelming. To Chevrolet's credit, later generations improved significantly, but the 1990s Blazer remains a textbook example of how design flaws, stability issues, and inadequate crash protection combined to give a once popular SUV the dreaded death trap label. Number 13. Jeep Liberty, 2002 to 2012. The Jeep Liberty debuted as a rugged, affordable SUV with a bold personality. But underneath the adventurous marketing was a safety controversy that would haunt the model for years. A fuel tank design that experts argued made the Liberty dangerously vulnerable to deadly fires during rear-end collisions. It wasn't a small issue. It became one of the most widely discussed SUV safety concerns of the 2000s. The problem centered on the Liberty's fuel tank placement. Located behind the rear axle and positioned low, the tank was exposed during certain types of impacts. In moderate or severe rear-end crashes, debris or vehicle components could puncture the tank, leading to fuel leaks and, in the worst cases, explosions. Several high-profile accidents reignited the debate every few years, each drawing new attention to the Liberty's structural vulnerability. This ultimately led the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, to question the design. After extensive investigation, regulators pushed for a major recall affecting more than 1 million Jeep Liberty and Jeep Grand Cherokee models. The proposed fix involved installing a rear steel hitch assembly to act as a protective barrier, an unusual recall solution that highlighted how serious the risk was. Beyond the fuel tank controversy, the Liberty also faced criticism for its rollover potential. Like many SUVs of its time, it had a high center of gravity and stiff suspension. Emergency maneuvers, sudden swerves, or high-speed cornering could catch drivers off guard. Add in mediocre crash test scores and inconsistent airbag performance, and the Liberty's reputation grew even worse. Despite its loyal customer base and Jeep's rugged brand image, safety experts repeatedly pointed to the Liberty as one of the most troubling SUVs of its era. Its combination of rollover risk and catastrophic fire danger earned it a lasting place on lists of vehicles labeled death traps. Number 12. Mitsubishi Montero/Pajero, 2001. The Mitsubishi Montero, known globally as the Pajero, was admired for its off-road capability. But in 2001, it became the center of an international safety scandal after a series of tests revealed severe stability issues that shocked both consumers and experts. The problem wasn't subtle or debatable. The Montero actually failed the infamous moose test, a maneuver designed to simulate suddenly swerving around an obstacle. And it didn't just struggle. It nearly tipped over multiple times in front of cameras. This test failure was broadcast widely, especially in Europe, where automotive safety standards are extremely strict. Journalists demonstrated how the Montero lifted dangerously onto two wheels during rapid avoidance maneuvers. An immediate red flag for any SUV safety agencies quickly began questioning whether the design of the suspension, chassis balance, and weight distribution made the vehicle inherently unstable at higher speeds. Mitsubishi strongly pushed back, suggesting that the testing was flawed. But additional independent evaluations continued producing the same alarming results. Poor stability, unpredictable handling, and an unusually high likelihood of tipping under sudden steering input. Experts concluded that the combination of a tall body, soft suspension tuning, and uneven weight transfer created a recipe for rollovers. In the U.S., Consumer Reports published its own findings and issued harsh warnings. The publication went so far as to give the Montero a not acceptable safety rating, one of the strongest negative classifications the organization can assign. That public verdict damaged consumer confidence almost instantly. To make matters worse, the Montero also suffered from concerns about braking performance and steering response. Tests showed that in emergency situations, drivers struggled to maintain control, especially on highways or during rapid lane changes. Even though later models saw improvements, the early 2000s Montero remains infamous for one of the most dramatic SUV stability failures ever caught on video number 11. Suzuki Samurai, 1980s to 1990s. Few SUVs in history have been as publicly condemned as the Suzuki Samurai. What made it infamous wasn't a quiet recall or a hidden engineering flaw, it was a nationally televised controversy that exploded into one of the most heated automotive safety battles ever. The Samurai became a household name not because of its capability, but because experts warned that the vehicle was dangerously prone to rollovers, even during routine driving conditions. The turning point came when Consumer Reports conducted a series of stability tests on the Samurai. During sharp turns and avoidance maneuvers, the lightweight SUV lifted onto two wheels repeatedly. The publication concluded that the Samurai demonstrated poor stability and was at risk of rolling over far too easily. This was no ordinary critique. Consumer Reports issued one of its rare and severe, not acceptable ratings. The fallout was immediate. Headlines across the U.S. labeled the Samurai unsafe, and sales plummeted. Suzuki fought back fiercely, launching a long legal battle against Consumer Reports. They claimed the testing was exaggerated and unfair. But independent experts continued to raise concerns about the vehicle's tall, narrow stance, combined with its ultra-light body, which made it more vulnerable to tipping during sudden steering inputs. Real-world incidents supported these concerns. Drivers reported losing control during quick lane changes or while swerving to avoid obstacles. Law firms began building cases around rollover accidents, and safety advocates warned families to avoid purchasing the model entirely. The controversy became so large that it overshadowed the Samurai's strengths, such as off-road capability and efficiency. Despite Suzuki's defense, the damage was permanent. The Samurai became a cultural reference for instability, often cited in documentaries, legal studies, and safety discussions as one of the most public examples of rollover-prone engineering. Even decades later, experts continue to include the Samurai whenever discussing SUVs that were widely labeled as death traps. Number 10. Isuzu Trooper, 1990s. The Isuzu Trooper was once marketed as a durable, go-anywhere SUV, but it quickly gained a troubling reputation that overshadowed its rugged appeal. By the mid-1990s, experts and watchdog groups were repeatedly warning consumers about the Trooper's alarming rollover potential. What made the situation worse was that these warnings didn't come from isolated crash reports. They came from controlled tests that consistently showed the same dangerous results. Consumer reports played a major role in exposing the problem. During high-speed avoidance maneuvers, the Trooper lifted dangerously on two wheels, sometimes to the point where test drivers had to abort the maneuver to prevent a full rollover. This wasn't just a slight imbalance, it was a clear sign that the vehicle's weight distribution and stability were fundamentally flawed. The publication ultimately rated the Trooper as unsafe for normal road use and advised consumers not to buy it. Isuzu fiercely disagreed with these findings, accusing testers of exaggeration and improper test execution. They launched a public relations campaign and defended the Trooper's engineering. But as more independent evaluations came in, with many showing similarly dangerous outcomes, the controversy grew. Safety agencies and legal experts pointed to the SUV's high center of gravity, narrow stance, and suspension tuning as major contributors to its instability. Real-world data supported the concerns. Insurance companies and accident databases reflected a higher-than-average number of rollover incidents for Trooper models. Some cases involved everyday driving scenarios, such as sudden swerves or abrupt turns, conditions an SUV should be able to handle safely. The repeated concerns, combined with mounting lawsuits, ultimately made the Trooper a symbol of rollover-prone SUVs of the 1990s. Even though Isuzu tried to update the design in later years, the damage to its reputation was irreversible. Among experts, the Trooper remains one of the most widely cited SUVs ever labeled a death trap due to its unstable design and high-risk handling behavior. Number 9. Kia Sorento, 2011 to 2014. The early 2010s Kia Sorento earned strong sales, modern styling, and plenty of attention from families. Yet beneath its popularity was a series of severe safety concerns that experts couldn't ignore. These model years became notorious for a troubling pattern of engine failures and fire risks that resulted in thousands of complaints, intense investigations, and one of the largest safety recalls in Kia's history. The biggest danger centered around the Sorento's Theta 2 engine. Manufacturing defects caused metal debris to circulate within the engine, which could lead to sudden seizure while driving. When an engine locks up at highway speeds, the driver loses power instantly, and that means no acceleration, compromised steering assist, and limited braking effectiveness. Many drivers described terrifying moments where their Sorento simply shut down in the middle of traffic. But it didn't stop there. In some cases, the same internal engine failure triggered oil leaks and overheating that led to engine fires. Vehicles caught fire on roadsides, in driveways, and even while being driven at slow speeds. Safety agencies launched multiple investigations into Kia and Hyundai, which shared similar engines, uncovering issues with machining processes, quality control lapses, and internal documentation that raised serious questions about oversight. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration eventually forced a massive recall affecting millions of vehicles, including the Sorento. Experts stressed that the combination of sudden engine failure and fire potential made these models significantly more dangerous than typical mechanical issues. Some consumer advocates labeled them rolling fire hazards. Structural complaints added to the SUV's troubled reputation. Owners reported airbag malfunctions and frame corrosion, especially in regions with harsh winters. Several crash reports highlighted cases where airbags failed to deploy during significant impacts. Although later generations of the Sorento improved dramatically, the 2011 to 2014 models remain tied to one of the most troubling safety controversies of the decade. To this day, experts often cite these Sorentos as examples of how mechanical defects can turn a popular family SUV into a vehicle considered by many to be a serious safety risk, or, bluntly, a death trap. Number 8. Hyundai Santa Fe, 2010 to 2014. The 2010 to 2014 Hyundai Santa Fe may look like a modern, family-friendly SUV, but these model years became the focus of serious safety concerns that eventually turned into federal investigations and massive recalls. Like the Kia Sorento from the same era, the Santa Fe suffered from engine defects so severe that experts warned the vehicle could become dangerous in everyday driving situations. The central issue stemmed from Hyundai's Theta, two 4-cylinder and V6 engines, which had a manufacturing defect linked to improper machining. This defect created microscopic metal shavings that circulated through the engine, hindering lubrication and leading to premature wear. Over time, this caused sudden engine seizure, often happening while the SUV was cruising at highway speeds. When an engine locks up at 60 miles per hour, the driver is instantly left without power, and that makes it extremely difficult to maintain control or safely maneuver off the road. But what made the Santa Fe particularly frightening was how quickly these failures escalated. Engine seizure sometimes caused overheating, which, in multiple documented cases, sparked fires under the hood. Drivers reported smoke pouring from vents, flames erupting from the engine bay, and vehicles burning within minutes. Videos of these incidents circulated widely, increasing public pressure on the automaker beyond engine issues. The Santa Fe faced complaints about failing airbag sensors, malfunctioning stability control systems, and corrosion-related suspension problems. Owners reported scenarios where safety features that should have activated simply didn't work. Combined with the possibility of a catastrophic engine failure, these problems created a dangerous mix that experts repeatedly warned about. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration launched extensive investigations, eventually prompting Hyundai to recall millions of vehicles. The situation grew so serious that federal authorities fined the automaker for delays in reporting safety defects. Although later versions of the Santa Fe became far more reliable, the 2010 to 2014 models remain infamous. For many safety watchdogs, these SUVs symbolize how manufacturing flaws, when ignored or poorly addressed, can turn an otherwise respectable vehicle into one of the most concerning death traps on the road. Number 7. Chevrolet Suburban, 1990s models. The Chevrolet Suburban is known today as a massive, dependable family hauler. But the 1990s models carried a far darker reputation that many drivers have forgotten. Safety experts repeatedly warned that certain Suburban generations showed a dangerous tendency toward rollover accidents, and their structural weaknesses made those rollovers far more deadly than they should have been. The biggest issue came from the Suburban's sheer size combined with its outdated engineering. These earlier models sat high off the ground with a tall, boxy design and a relatively narrow track width for their height. This combination created a high center of gravity that made the SUV especially vulnerable during sharp turns, evasive maneuvers, or sudden swerves at freeway speeds. Stability testing confirmed that even moderate avoidance maneuvers could cause the Suburban to lean heavily or lose grip, setting the stage for violent rollovers. But what made these incidents particularly dangerous was the Suburban's weak roof structure. Safety investigators found that the roof pillars and support beams lacked the strength needed to withstand the forces of a rollover. In many real-world accidents, the roof collapsed severely, reducing survivable space for passengers and leading to serious or fatal injuries. Litigation records from the era show multiple cases where families sued General Motors for inadequate roof strength after catastrophic crashes. Experts also raised concerns about the SUV's braking performance and steering response. The Suburban's heavy weight strained its braking system, making emergency stops longer and less predictable than those of smaller SUVs. Meanwhile, its older steering design often felt loose or delayed, making it difficult for drivers to correct the SUV's path once it began to tip. Although the Suburban eventually evolved into one of the safest full-size SUVs on the market, its 1990s models remain a stark reminder of how outdated engineering and a lack of modern safety features can turn size and power into hidden danger. These early Suburbans are still cited by experts as some of the most rollover-prone full-size SUVs ever sold, earning them a place on lists of vehicles labeled death traps. Number 6. Ford Bronco II, 1980s to 1990s. Few SUVs in American history have a safety legacy as notorious as the Ford Bronco II. This vehicle became one of the most widely cited examples of an SUV with an inherent rollover problem, so much so that it appeared in major lawsuits, news investigations, and safety reports for decades. By the time production ended, the Bronco II had earned a reputation that experts openly described as one of the most dangerous SUVs ever sold. The core issue was its design. The Bronco II was built tall, narrow, and relatively short, giving it a high center of gravity and limited stability. In normal, careful driving, it didn't always show its flaws. But in emergency situations, sudden lane changes, sharp turns, or swerves, the Bronco II behaved unpredictably. Multiple stability tests in the 1980s revealed that it lifted onto two wheels much more easily than competing SUVs. In some documented cases, the vehicle rolled over even at moderate speeds during standardized maneuvers. What made the situation worse was the number of real-world accidents. Studies conducted by various safety organizations and insurance companies found that the Bronco II had one of the highest rollover rates in its class. Hundreds of rollover-related fatalities were reported over its production lifespan, prompting lawsuits across the country. Families claimed the SUV was fundamentally unstable, while Ford insisted it met safety regulations of its time. However, internal Ford documents later surfaced during litigation, showing that engineers had raised stability concerns early in development. Some reports suggested that design changes aimed at improving rollover resistance were rejected because they would reduce profits. These revelations fueled public outrage and strengthened critics' claims that the SUV should never have been sold in its original form. Even decades later, automotive historians and safety experts continue referencing the Bronco II as a cautionary tale, an example of how engineering compromises and corporate decisions can create a vehicle with a legacy of fatal accidents. Its reputation as a death trap is so well established that it remains one of the most infamous SUVs ever produced. Number 5. Jeep Grand Cherokee, 1993 to 2004. The first-generation Jeep Grand Cherokee is remembered as one of the most influential SUVs of the 1990s, but it also carries a safety controversy that experts still discuss today. These early models were linked to a fuel tank design flaw that made them vulnerable to catastrophic fires in rear-end collisions. The issue became so serious that federal regulators eventually ordered a massive recall affecting millions of vehicles. The problem centered on the placement of the fuel tank. Like the Jeep Liberty, the Grand Cherokee's tank was mounted behind the rear axle and positioned low enough that it could be struck directly during certain types of impacts. In moderate or severe rear-end collisions, debris or vehicle components could puncture the tank, causing fuel leaks that ignited almost instantly. Several crashes resulted in intense fires, and tragic fatalities drew national attention to the issue. As complaints grew, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began a multi-year investigation. Their findings revealed an alarming pattern of fuel-related fire incidents. Safety watchdog groups called the Grand Cherokee one of the most dangerous SUVs on American roads at the time, and pushed for immediate federal action under mounting pressure. Chrysler eventually agreed to a recall that involved installing a trailer hitch assembly designed to shield the tank. But the controversy didn't stop at the fuel system. Early Grand Cherokee models also displayed rollover tendencies during abrupt maneuvers, partly due to their high center of gravity and relatively narrow stance. Reports of structural weaknesses in certain crash scenarios raised additional concerns. Some crash test results showed poor outcomes for rear impacts and limited protection for rear passengers. Despite the SUV's popularity, long-term reliability, and successful later generations, the 1993 to 2004 Grand Cherokee remains tied to one of the most highly publicized safety debates in automotive history. The combination of rollover risk and fire danger earned these years a reputation that experts still reference whenever discussing SUVs labeled as death traps. Number 4. Toyota 4Runner, early 1990s. The Toyota 4Runner is known today for its durability and reliability, but the early 1990s models tell a very different story, one that many drivers have forgotten. These second-generation 4Runners were tied to a troubling pattern of rollover incidents that led experts to warn consumers about their stability, particularly during emergency maneuvers. For a vehicle built with Toyota's reputation, this was a shocking turn. The root cause of the issue was the 4Runner's design. Like many early SUVs, it was built on a truck platform, which meant it had a tall body, narrow stance, and high center of gravity. These traits created a recipe for instability at highway speeds. In avoidance tests, simulating a driver suddenly swerving to avoid danger, the early 4Runners leaned heavily, lost grip, and in some cases tipped onto two wheels. Safety testers raised red flags, noting that the vehicle's tendency to overreact to sharp steering inputs made it dangerous in real-world emergency scenarios. Compounding the problem was the suspension setup. The 4Runner's rear suspension, in particular, was known for abrupt weight transfer during quick turns. Instead of stabilizing the vehicle, it sometimes amplified the tipping motion. Several independent evaluations pointed out that minor suspension changes could have reduced rollover risk significantly. But those changes didn't come until later generations' real-world data supported these concerns. Crash records from the early 90s showed higher-than-average rollover rates for the model. Some incidents occurred during everyday driving, lane changes, U-turns, or swerves to avoid debris. Lawsuits and safety petitions soon followed, with experts arguing that the structural design made certain model years inherently unsafe. Roof strength added to the danger. During rollover accidents, the roof structure of early 4Runners often buckled more than expected, reducing survivable space inside the cabin. Safety analysts highlighted that even if the vehicle didn't cause the rollover, the structural weaknesses made the outcomes more severe. While Toyota corrected the issues in later designs, making the 4Runner one of the toughest SUVs on the market, the early 1990s models remain a cautionary example. Their combination of rollover risk, unstable handling, and compromised roof strength earned them a place on lists of SUVs that experts labeled death traps. Number 3. GMC Yukon, early 2000s. The early 2000s GMC Yukon was a popular full-size SUV known for power, comfort, and towing capability. But it also carried a set of safety concerns that experts repeatedly warned about. These models were part of a generation of large SUVs that suffered from a combination of rollover vulnerability, weak roof strength, and inconsistent crash test performance. While many families trusted the Yukon as a dependable daily driver, safety agencies were far less confident. Like other large SUVs from this era, the Yukon had a high center of gravity. This made the vehicle inherently more susceptible to rollovers during emergency maneuvers, sudden swerves, or high-speed turns. Stability testing showed that the Yukon could become unstable under sharp steering inputs, especially when loaded with passengers or cargo. The added weight often shifted the SUV's balance abruptly, making rollovers more likely in real-world situations. But what worried experts even more was the Yukon's roof crush performance. In rollover accidents, the roof structure of certain early 2000s models showed significant weakness. Safety studies found that the pillars and support beams were not strong enough to maintain cabin space in a violent rollover. When the roof collapses, even partially, the risk of life-threatening injuries increases dramatically. Several lawsuits alleged that these structural weaknesses led to preventable fatalities. Crash test ratings revealed additional concerns. Government and insurance industry tests highlighted issues with side impact protection, particularly for rear passengers. Some models lacked side curtain airbags, leaving occupants vulnerable in collisions where taller trucks or SUVs struck the Yukon. From the side steering response and braking performance were also frequently criticized. Drivers reported that the Yukon felt floaty or loose at higher speeds, making emergency corrections harder to execute safely. The SUV's heavy frame required longer stopping distances, which left little room for error in sudden braking situations. Although GMC later addressed many of these problems with improved engineering and advanced safety features, the early 2000s Yukon remains a notable example of an SUV whose size and power masked serious safety shortcomings. Experts continue to reference these models when discussing full-size SUVs that were labeled death traps due to structural weaknesses and rollover risks. Number 2. Nissan Pathfinder, 1996 to 2004. The late 90s and early 2000s Nissan Pathfinder had the rugged look of a dependable family SUV, but underneath, it carried safety problems that grew into one of the most serious corrosion-related controversies of its era. What made these Pathfinders especially dangerous wasn't just a single flaw. experts pointed to steering failures, structural rust, and crash performance issues that, when combined, created a vehicle many reviewers eventually described as hazardous. The most alarming problem involved severe frame and steering corrosion. In colder regions where road salt was heavily used, the Pathfinder's front subframe was prone to rusting so aggressively that it could weaken to the point of collapse. This part held critical components including the engine cradle, control arms, and, most importantly, the steering mechanism. In multiple real-world cases, drivers experienced sudden steering failure when the corroded structure snapped or shifted unexpectedly. Losing steering control without warning made the vehicle extremely dangerous, especially at highway speeds. The issue became so widespread that Nissan issued a major recall to inspect and repair, or in some cases replace, the front subframe. Safety authorities noted that the corrosion could become severe without visible warning signs, meaning drivers might be unaware of the danger until it was too late. The Pathfinder also suffered from stability issues typical of truck-based SUVs at the time. Its high center of gravity and soft suspension created rollover concerns during sharp maneuvers or emergency avoidance. During independent handling tests, the Pathfinder showed noticeable body lean and inconsistencies in high-speed cornering stability. While not as infamous as some competitors, experts still flagged it as a model with elevated rollover potential. Crash test results further complicated its reputation. Some model years received mediocre ratings due to limited side impact protection and weaker structural integrity during frontal collisions. In the most severe cases, the combination of corrosion-related structural failure and rollover tendency made certain crashes far more dangerous. Although Nissan addressed these issues in later designs, the 1996 to 2004 Pathfinder remains one of the most frequently cited examples of an SUV whose aging design and structural weaknesses earned it a place on lists of vehicles labeled death traps. Number 1. Land Rover Discovery Series. 2. 1999 to 2004. The Land Rover Discovery Series. 2 looked like the perfect adventure SUV, rugged, premium, and ready for anything. But behind its iconic design was a set of serious safety concerns that earned it one of the most troubling reputations of any SUV sold in the early 2000s. Experts repeatedly warned that the Discovery II had significant rollover risk, suspension vulnerabilities, and structural weaknesses that made it far more dangerous than its elegant exterior suggested. The most alarming issue centered on stability. The Discovery Series 2 was tall, narrow, and heavy, an already risky combination. But what made it worse was its suspension system. Many models were equipped with air suspension at the rear, which could fail without warning. When that happened, the SUV's rear end sagged dramatically, instantly altering the vehicle's balance and increasing rollover risk. Drivers reported sudden changes in handling, swaying at highway speeds, and unpredictable weight transfer during cornering. Stability tests revealed that the Discovery II leaned excessively during sharp maneuvers. In emergency situations, such as swerving to avoid an obstacle, the SUV exhibited a tendency to tip dangerously. Publications in Europe and the US called attention to this behavior, noting that even with electronic traction and stability systems, the underlying design made it inherently unstable. Crash test performance didn't help its reputation. Several evaluations highlighted weaknesses in side impact and rollover protection. Roof strength was especially concerning. In rollover accidents, the roof structure of certain models showed significant collapse, reducing survival space for passengers. This aligned with a pattern of severe real-world injuries that safety analysts examined throughout the early 2000s. Mechanical reliability issues added fuel to the fire. Owners frequently reported steering failures, braking inconsistencies, and suspension malfunctions, problems that, for some drivers, appeared without warning. In combination with the SUV's rollover tendencies, these mechanical flaws created scenarios where drivers struggled to maintain control. Lawsuits and owner complaints piled up, and automotive publications from that era often rated the Discovery II among the least reliable and least safe SUVs in its class. While later generations improved dramatically, the Discovery Series 2 remains infamous as an SUV that many experts bluntly labeled a death trap, a vehicle whose engineering shortcomings created dangerous situations for far too many drivers. SUVs have evolved enormously over the past 2 decades, with stronger roofs, smarter stability systems, and better crash protection than ever before. But the vehicles on this list show what happens when design flaws, corporate missteps, and outdated engineering collide. Some were victims of their era, others of poor decisions, but all earned reputations experts will never forget. Whether buying new or used, safety should always come first. Check crash test ratings, look up recalls, review structural reports, and always understand a vehicle's history before trusting it on the road.